In the fog-choked shadows of a stormy London night, a trembling governess, her golden pince-nez glinting with secrets, begs Sherlock Holmes for helper. Brutal murder has stained the remote Yoxley Old Place, and an innocent man stands accused as Holmes unravels a web of cryptic codes, Russian spies, and a bloodied study. A single lens fragment points to a hidden witness or a killer lurking in the manor's garden. But when the trail leads to a shadowy agent known as the Raven, will Holmes trap the murderer, or will the darkness of international intrigue swallow them all? Chapter 1. The curious visitor. It was a raw, tempestuous evening in the late autumn of 1894, when the wind howled through the narrow streets of London, rattling the shutters of our Baker Street lodgings and sending swirls of fog curling about the gas lamps. Within the warm confines of our sitting room, Sherlock Holmes reclined in his favourite armchair, his long, lean frame draped in a dressing gown of mouse-coloured silk. His violin lay neglected across his knees, its bow dangling listlessly, while his hawk-like eyes stared into the fire, lost in some labyrinthine thought. I, Dr. John Watson, sat opposite, my attention divided between the crackling hearth and the columns of the Evening Standard, which reported yet another unsolved theft. In Mayfair, the hour was late, and the world outside seemed to conspire against any intrusion. Yet it was on such nights that adventure often found its way to our door. Mrs. Hudson, our indefatigable landlady, appeared at the threshold, her face bearing the peculiar mix of exasperation and deference which Holmes's irregular visitors invariably provoked. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, her tone suggesting that the caller's persistence had overcome her better judgment. "She's in a right state, sir, and won't take no for an answer." Holmes's eyes flickered with sudden interest, as if the wind itself had blown a spark into his ennui. "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson," he said, setting aside his violin and drawing himself upright with that feline grace which betokened his readiness for action. The woman who entered was of middle years, perhaps 45, though her countenance bore the marks of recent distress, which lent her an air of premature age. She was clad in a severe black dress, its high collar and plain cut suggesting a life of modest propriety. Yet there was a certain dignity in her bearing that spoke of inner resolve. Her hair, streaked with grey, was drawn tightly into a bun, and her hands, clasped nervously before her, were ungloved, revealing fingers stained faintly with ink. Most striking, however, was the pair of golden Pince-Nez spectacles that hung from a delicate chain about her neck, their lenses catching the firelight in a manner that seemed almost to animate them. She introduced herself as Miss Eleanor Grayson, a governess lately in the employ of a family at Yoxley Old Place, a remote manor in the Kentish countryside. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice low but trembling with urgency, "I have come to you because a great injustice has been done, and I know of no one else who can set it right. A terrible crime has occurred at Yoxley, and an innocent man stands accused. I implore you to hear my story." Holmes gestured to the chair beside the fire, his manner now wholly attentive. "Pray, be seated, Miss Grayson, and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. My friend Dr. Watson and I are at your service." Miss Grayson perched on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid, as though the act of sitting were a concession to necessity rather than comfort. She drew a deep breath, and her tale began to unfold, halting at first, but gaining fluency as her agitation found expression. "I have been governess at Yoxley Old Place for nigh on 3 years," she said, "teaching the young daughters of Professor Coram, a retired scholar of some repute. The household is small. The professor, his housekeeper, Mrs. Marker, a maid named Anna, a groundskeeper called Willoughby Smith, and Mr. Stanley Hopkins, a tutor engaged to instruct the professor's grandson, who visits occasionally. It is a quiet place, Mr. Holmes, far from the bustle of town, and until 2 nights ago, I would have called it peaceful. Her fingers tightened around the chain of her pince-nez, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. On Tuesday evening, I was in my room preparing lessons for the morrow, when I heard a sharp, terrible cry that seemed to come from the lower floor. I hurried downstairs, fearing some accident, and found the household gathered in the study. There, lying upon the floor, was Mr. Hopkins, dead, with a knife driven deep into his heart. The sight was dreadful, sir, and I confess I was near to fainting. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Describe the scene precisely, Miss Grayson. Where was each member of the household? What was the state of the room? Miss Grayson nodded, her brow furrowing as she recalled the moment. The study is a large room, lined with books and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The professor keeps it as his private sanctum, though Mr. Hopkins was permitted to use it for his work. When I entered, Mrs. Marker was standing near the door, her hands to her face, weeping. Anna, the maid, was beside her, pale and trembling. Willoughby Smith was by the window, which was open, and he seemed dazed, as though he had just come in from the garden. Professor Coram was not present. He is infirm and keeps to his rooms most evenings. The Nefa, long, thin blade, like a letter opener, was still in Mr. Hopkins's chest, and there was blood upon the floor and desk. I saw no one else, but I am certain I heard footsteps outside, running toward the woods. Holmes's fingers steepled before his lips, a sure sign that his mind was racing. And the police, what was their conclusion? The local constabulary arrived within the hour, Miss Grayson continued, and by morning, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard was summoned, for the case had grown complex. They found a knife in Willoughby Smith's quarters, hidden beneath his mattress, and it bore traces of blood. They arrested him at once, claiming he had motive, for he and Mr. Hopkins had quarrelled earlier that day over some trivial matter. About the garden, I believe. But Mr. Holmes, I know Willoughby Smith. He is a rough man, perhaps, but not a murderer. I swear he is innocent. Holmes's gaze was now fixed upon her with an intensity that might have unnerved a lesser soul. What makes you so certain of his innocence, Miss Grayson? And why come to me rather than trust the police? Her eyes met his, and for a moment, a flicker of defiance shone through her fear. Because I saw something that night, sir, something the police have dismissed. As I stood by the study window, before the others arrived, I glimpsed a figure. In the gardener, tall man, cloaked and moving swiftly toward the trees. I could not see his face, but he was no one I knew. I told the inspector, but he said it was fancy, born of shock. Yet I know what I saw, and I believe that man is the true killer. Holmes sat back, his expression inscrutable. You mentioned a quarrel between Smith and Hopkins. Was this a common occurrence? No, sir, she replied. They were civil enough, though not friends. Mr. Hopkins was a quiet man, bookish, and kept to himself. Willoughby is more outspoken, but I never saw true enmity between them. And Professor Coram, Holmes asked, what manner of man is he? Miss Grayson hesitated, choosing her words with care. He is a scholar, sir, once renowned for his work in ancient languages. He is old now, and frail, confined to a wheelchair. He is kind to his family but distant, absorbed in his studies. I seldom see him, save at meals." Holmes nodded, his mind evidently turning over the facts like a jeweler inspecting a gem. "One final question, Miss Grayson. Your pince-nez, have you ever lost or damaged them?" She blinked, startled by the abrupt shift. "My spectacles? No, sir, they are always with me. They were a gift from my late brother, and I treasured them. Why do you ask?" Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "A passing thought. You have given us much to consider, Miss Grayson. I shall take the case, and Dr. Watson and I will travel to Yoxley tomorrow. Where may we find you?" "I am staying at the village inn, the Red Lion," she said, rising. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I pray you can save Willoughby Smith." When she had gone, Holmes remained silent for some minutes, his pipe sending clouds of smoke toward the ceiling. I knew better than to interrupt, for his mind was at work, sifting through the details of her tale. At length, he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "A curious case, Watson. A murder in a remote manor, a groundskeeper accused, a shadowy figure in the garden, and a pair of golden pince-nez that may hold more significance than their owner suspects. There is a deeper current here, one that eludes the plodding methods of Lestrade." "Do you suspect Miss Grayson?" I asked, surprised by his focus on her spectacles. Holmes smiled faintly. "I suspect everyone, Watson, until the facts prove otherwise. Her story is plausible, yet there are gaps, small inconsistencies, that suggest she knows more than she has told. The pince-nez, for instance. Why did she clutch them so tightly when speaking of the murder? And why did her eyes flicker when I asked about them?" "Perhaps she is merely nervous," I suggested. "The shock of the crime, perhaps." Holmes interrupted, "But I think not. The pince-nez are a clue, Watson, though to what, I cannot yet say. Pack your bag, old friend. We leave for Kent at first light." The remainder of the evening passed in quiet preparation. Holmes retired to his chemical table, where he busied himself with some obscure experiment involving a fragment of glass and a Bunsen burner, while I arranged our travel and penned a brief note to my practice, informing my locum of my absence. As I lay in bed that night, the wind still rattling the windows, I could not shake the image of Miss Grayson's face, her earnest plea, her trembling hands, and those golden spectacles glinting in the firelight. What secret did they conceal? And what darkness awaited us at Yoxley Old Place? The morning dawned grey and cold, with a fine drizzle that turned the streets of London into a glistening maze. We caught the early train from Charing Cross, and as the city gave way to the green expanse of Kent, Holmes sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape, though I knew his thoughts were elsewhere. The journey was uneventful, save for a brief encounter with a talkative vicar who regaled us with tales of local folklore, none of which Holmes deigned to acknowledge. Yoxley Station was little more than a platform, its single bench sodden from the rain. A trap awaited us, sent by the Red Lion, and we were soon rattling along a narrow lane bordered by hedgerows and ancient oaks. The driver, a taciturn man with a face like weathered leather, offered little conversation, though he muttered something about trouble at the old place when I mentioned our destination, Yoxley. Old Place came into view as we crested a low hill, its grey stone walls rising from a sea of mist like some medieval fortress. The manor was larger than I had expected, its gabled roof and mullioned windows giving it an air of faded grandeur. Ivy clung to its walls, and the gardens, though well kept, seemed to press too closely, as if guarding secrets of their own. A chill ran through me, not from the damp, but from the sense that we were entering a place where the past held sway, and the present was but a fragile veneer. We were met at the door by Mrs. Marker, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a face as hard as the Kentish flint. Her eyes, small and shrewd, appraised us with suspicion. But she ushered us into the hall, where a fire burned fitfully in a vast stone hearth. The interior was as imposing as the exterior, with dark panelling and a staircase that curved upward into shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, mingled with a faint, acrid tang that I could not place. "Inspector Lestrade is in the study," Mrs. Marker said curtly. "He's expecting you." Holmes nodded, his gaze already darting about the hall, noting the worn rugs, the portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and a curious mark on the floor, a faint smudge of ash, as if a cigar had been ground out in haste. He said nothing, but I knew he had filed it away for later consideration. The study was at the end of a long corridor, its door standing ajar. As we approached, I caught the murmur of voices Lestrade's, sharp and impatient, and another, lower and more measured. The room itself was a scholar's haven, its walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, their leather spines gleaming dully in the light from a single lamp. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with papers, inkwells, and a brass candelabrum. The window, a tall casement, was open, admitting a damp breeze that stirred the curtains. And there, upon the floor, was the dark stain of blood, now congealed into a grim testament to the crime. Lestrade rose from a chair, his ferret-like face breaking into a grudging smile. "Holmes, Watson, you've come at last. I'd hoped to have this wrapped up before you arrived, but the case has its knots." "Most cases do," Holmes replied dryly, his eyes already scanning the room. He moved to the desk, his fingers brushing the papers, then to the window, where he examined the latch with a magnifying glass. "Tell me, Lestrade, what have you found?" The inspector recounted the facts as he saw them: the knife, the quarrel, the blood in Smith's quarters. Holmes listened without interruption, though his expression grew more skeptical with each word. When Lestrade finished, Holmes crouched by the bloodstain, his lens now trained on the floor. "Interesting," he murmured, retrieving a small object with a pair of tweezers. It was a fragment of glass, no larger than a pinhead, but it sparkled under the lamp. He slipped it into an envelope, his face betraying no hint of its significance. "What's that, then?" Lestrade asked, peering over his shoulder. "A trifle," Holmes said, rising. "But trifles, Lestrade, are the threads from which truth is woven. I shall need to see the household and the grounds before I can say more." As we left the study, I glanced back at the bloodstain, and a shiver passed through me. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for Holmes to unravel its secrets. And somewhere, in the shadows of Yoxley Old Place, I felt the presence of that cloaked figure Miss Grayson had seen, a spectre whose identity might hold the key to the mystery of the golden Pince-Nez. Chapter 2. The Manor at Yoxley. Morning train from Charing Cross bore us through the mist-shrouded fields of Kent, its rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to the silence that had settled between Sherlock Holmes and myself. Holmes sat by the window, his sharp profile etched against the grey light, his eyes fixed not on the passing landscape, but on some inner vision, where the fragments of Miss Grayson's tale were no doubt arranging themselves into patterns only he could discern. I, Dr. John Watson, occupied myself with a medical journal, though my thoughts strayed often to the grim purpose of our journey. The murder at Yoxley Old Place, with its shadowy figure and bloodied study, promised to be one of those singular cases that stirred Holmes's intellect to its fullest. We alighted at Yoxley Station, a desolate platform where the drizzle seemed to cling to the air like a living thing. A trap, its driver muffled against the cold, awaited us, and we were soon rattling along a winding lane, the hedgerows glistening with moisture. Yoxley Old Place emerged from the fog as we rounded a bend, its grey stone walls looming like a fortress from some bygone age. The manor was a sprawling edifice, its gabled roof and tall chimneys half hidden by ancient oaks, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed to whisper of secrets long buried. Ivy clung to the walls, giving the house an air of melancholy, as if it was slowly being reclaimed by the earth. I felt a prickle of unease, not from the weather, but from the sense that we were entering a place where time moved differently, where the past held dominion over the present. The trap drew up before the great oak door, and we were met by Mrs. Marker, the housekeeper, whose stern countenance and black attire made her seem a guardian of the manor's gloom. Her eyes, small and piercing, assessed us with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, but she said nothing beyond a curt, "This way, gentlemen." She led us into a cavernous hall, its dark panelling absorbing the light from a single chandelier. A massive staircase curved upward into shadow, and the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, old leather, and something fainter, sharper trace of smoke, perhaps, or some chemical residue I could not identify. Inspector Lestrade is in the study, Mrs. Marker said, her voice flat. He's been poking about all morning. Holmes nodded, his gaze already darting about the hall, noting the worn tapestries, the portraits of dear-faced ancestors, and a curious mark on the floor, a faint scuff, as if a heavy object had been dragged across the polished boards. He made no comment, but I knew his mind had seized upon it, filing it away for later scrutiny. The study was reached by a long corridor, its walls hung with faded prints of classical ruins. The door stood open, revealing a room that seemed at once a scholar's sanctuary and a scene of violence. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines bearing titles in Latin, Greek, and other tongues I could not decipher. A heavy oak desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with papers, a brass inkstand, and a candelabrum whose wax had dripped onto a leather blotter. A single casement window, its latch broken, admitted a chill breeze that stirred the heavy curtains, and there, upon the floor, was the dark stain of blood, now hardened into a grim reminder of the crime that had brought us here. Inspector Lestrade rose from a chair near the desk, his lean frame taut with the impatience of a man who felt himself out of his depth. "Holmes, Watson, you've made good time," he said, his voice carrying a note of grudging relief. "I'll be frank, this case is a tangle. The locals have botched the scene, trampling evidence like a herd of cattle, but have done what I can to preserve it." Holmes's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Your efforts are appreciated, Lestrade. Now, tell me what you have found." Lestrade gestured to the desk, where a few items had been laid out: a bloodied letter opener, a notebook with pages torn out, and a small key, its brass tarnished. "The facts are simple enough," he began. "Stanley Hopkins, the tutor, was found here 2 nights ago, stabbed through the heart with that knife. Willoughby Smith, the groundskeeper, was arrested after we found a matching blade in his quarters, hidden under a loose floorboard. There was blood on it, and the local surgeon confirms it's human. Smith and Hopkins had a row that afternoon, something about trespassers in the garden, overheard by Mrs. Marker. It's as clear a case as I've seen." Holmes's eyes, however, were not on Lestrade, but on the room itself. He moved with the precision of a predator, his long fingers tracing the edge of the desk, then pausing at the bloodstain. He crouched, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the floor. "Clear, you say," he murmured, "yet the window is open, and its latch is broken. Did you not find that curious?" Lestrade shrugged. "The locals say it's been broken for weeks, probably just carelessness." Holmes's gaze sharpened. Carelessness does not leave glass on the floor. He reached down and, with a pair of tweezers, retrieved a tiny fragment that sparkled in the lamplight. He held it up, turning it slowly. "This is no ordinary glass, Lestrade. It is from a lens, finely ground and of unusual thickness. I should wager it belongs to a pair of spectacles. Pince-Nez." Perhaps Lestrade's brow furrowed. "Spectacles? What's that got to do with anything?" Holmes slipped the fragment into an envelope, his face impassive. "Everything, Lestrade? Or nothing? We shall see." He turned his attention to the desk, where the papers caught his eye. Most were scholarly notes, written in a cramped hand, but one sheet bore a series of numbers, scrawled hastily in pencil. Holmes studied it for a moment, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. "These are not random figures," he said, more to himself than to us. "They suggest a code, or perhaps coordinates. Curious." I glanced at the bloodstain, its edges irregular, as if the body had been moved after the wound was struck. "Holmes," I ventured, "could the killer have entered through the window?" Miss Grayson spoke of a figure in the garden. Holmes nodded, his eyes still on the desk. "A possibility, Watson. The broken latch suggests entry or exit, but the blood pattern is inconsistent with a struggle. Hopkins was seated when he was struck, and the angle of the wound suggests a blow from above, delivered with force. The killer was likely someone he knew, or at least someone he did not fear." Lestrade snorted. "That fits Smith. He's a rough sort, always lurking about. The grounds, and that quarrels do not always lead to murder," Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp. "I should like to see the grounds, and then the household. Mrs. Marker, the maid Anna, and Professor Coram himself. There is more here than meets the eye." We stepped into the garden, a sprawling expanse of manicured lawns and tangled shrubbery, now sodden from the rain. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the ground near the study window. The earth was soft, and I saw what he was looking for: footprints, faint but distinct, leading from the window to a copse of trees at the garden's edge. He knelt, measuring the impressions with a tape. "A man's boots," he said. "Size 10, with a slight wear on the left heel. Not Smith's. I'll wager his feet are smaller, judging by the scuff in the hall." I followed his gaze to the trees, where the mist hung low, obscuring the path. "Could this be Miss Grayson's shadowy figure?" I asked. Holmes rose, brushing the mud from his knees. "Perhaps. But we must not leap to conclusions, Watson. The footprints are fresh, made within the last 2 days. They may belong to our killer, or to someone else entirely." Back inside, we were introduced to Anna, the maid, a slight girl of no more than 20, with nervous eyes and hands that fluttered like trapped birds. She answered Holmes's questions in a near whisper, claiming she had been in the kitchen when the cry was heard and had seen nothing unusual, yet her fingers bore the faint yellow stain of tobacco, and when Holmes remarked on it, she blushed and stammered, insisting she did not smoke. "Curious," Holmes said as we left her. A maid who smells of tobacco but denies it, and her hands tremble not from fear, I think, but from some secret she carries. Mrs. Marker was next, her answers as blunt as her demeanour. She confirmed the quarrel between Smith and Hopkins, describing it as a heated exchange about poachers in the woods. She had been in the pantry when the murder occurred, she said, and had seen no strangers about the house. Holmes listened in silence, his eyes lingering on her apron, which bore a faint smear of ash. Professor Coran, the master of the house, was our final interview. He received us in his private rooms, a dimly lit chamber filled with books and strange artifacts, ivory carvings, ancient manuscripts, and a curious brass instrument that resembled an astrolabe. He was an old man, frail and confined to a wheelchair, his face lined with the weight of years. Yet his eyes were sharp, almost predatory, and they followed Holmes with a wariness that belied his feeble appearance. "I know little of this tragedy," Coram said, his voice thin but precise. "Hopkins was a competent tutor, nothing more. I was in my rooms that evening, as is my custom. I heard no cry, saw no stranger." Holmes's gaze fell on a rug beside the wheelchair, where a faint burn mark marred the pattern. "You smoke, Professor?" he asked abruptly. Coram's fingers tightened on the arms of his chair. "Occasionally, Russian cigarettes, a habit from my travels." "What of it?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Nothing, for now, but I shall return, Professor. There are threads in this tapestry that require closer inspection." As we left the manor, the fog had thickened, wrapping Yoxley Old Place in a shroud that seemed to mirror the mystery within. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt weaving the clues, the broken latch, the lens fragment, the coded numbers, the burn mark into a pattern I could not yet see. "This is no simple murder, Watson," he said at last, as we climbed into the trap. "There is a deeper game afoot, one that reaches beyond the walls of this house. Tomorrow we shall unravel it further." Chapter 3. The Clue of the Pince-Nez Red Lion. A modest inn nestled in the heart of Yoxley village served as our temporary headquarters as Sherlock Holmes and I settled in to unravel the mystery of the murder at Yoxley Old Place. The evening was damp and cheerless, the fog pressing against the mullioned windows of our private parlour, where a fire sputtered fitfully in the grate. Holmes sat cross-legged upon a cushioned bench, his pipe sending wreaths of smoke curling toward the low ceiling, while his long fingers toyed with the tiny fragment of glass he had retrieved from the study floor. I, Dr. John Watson, occupied myself with notes on the case, though my thoughts were distracted by the eerie atmosphere of the Kentish countryside and the enigmatic clues that seemed to multiply with each hour. Holmes held the glass fragment to the lamplight, turning it slowly, so that its facets caught the glow in a prism of faint colours. "This, Watson," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "is no ordinary shard. It is from a lens, finely crafted, with a curvature that suggests a prescription of uncommon strength. I am convinced it belongs to a pair of Pince-Nez spectacles, and its presence in the study is no mere accident." I set down my pen, intrigued by his certainty. "Do you suspect it belongs to Miss Grayson's golden pince-nez? She wore them when she visited us, and you seemed to take particular interest in them." Holmes's eyes glinted with that peculiar intensity that marked the stirring of his deductive powers. "Miss Grayson's spectacles are indeed a point of interest, but we must not leap to conclusions. The lens may belong to her, or it may belong to another, perhaps the shadowy figure she claims to have seen in the garden. What intrigues me is why such a fragment was left behind. A broken lens suggests haste, struggle, or carelessness, none of which align with Lestrade's tidy theory of Willoughby Smith's guilt. He rose abruptly, pocketing the fragment, and began to pace the room, his lean frame casting long shadows across the oak-panelled walls. The study at Yoxley Old Place is a stage, Watson, and each prop the broken latch. The bloodstain, the coded numbers, this lens tells a story. Our task is to read it correctly. Tomorrow, we shall return to the manor and examine the grounds further. But tonight, I must test a hypothesis. Holmes drew from his pocket the folded sheet of paper he had taken from the desk, the one bearing a series of numbers scrawled in pencil. He spread it upon the table, and I leaned closer to study it. The figures were arranged in groups. 4-1 to 7, the 3rd of September 15, 2-8 menos 19, and so on, with no apparent pattern. A code, you said, I remarked. But what kind? A cipher, perhaps? Possibly, Holmes replied, his brow furrowed. It resembles no standard cipher, I know, yet its structure suggests purpose. It could be a reference to a book, a map, coordinate, or even a timetable. I shall need access to the professor's library to test the first possibility, but for now, let us consider the lens. If it is indeed from a Pince-Nez, its owner may have been in the study at the time of the murder or shortly before. I frowned, recalling Miss Grayson's tale. She said she was in her room when she heard the cry, and only then did she go downstairs. Could she have been mistaken about the figure in the garden? Perhaps she was closer to the scene than she admits. Holmes paused, his pipe halfway to his lips. A shrewd observation, Watson. Miss Grayson's account is compelling. Yet there is a tremor in her manner, hesitation when she speaks of the garden that suggests she is withholding something. Whether it is fear, guilt, or loyalty, I cannot yet say. But the lens is a tangible clue, and it will lead us to the truth. He resumed his pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Consider the facts. Stanley Hopkins was stabbed with a letter opener, a weapon of opportunity, not premeditation. The blow was delivered with precision, suggesting familiarity with the victim or the room. The window's broken latch and the footprints in the garden indicate an external presence. Yet the blood pattern suggests Hopkins was seated, unalarmed. And now, this lens a delicate object, easily lost in a moment of violence or flight. We must find its owner, Watson, for therein lies the key to the mystery. The next morning dawned with a pale sun struggling through the fog, casting a wan light over the village. We breakfasted quickly, Holmes eating little, his attention fixed on a local map he had procured from the innkeeper. The manor is isolated, he remarked, tracing a finger along the lanes surrounding Yoxley Old Place. The nearest house is a mile distant, and the woods beyond the garden offer ample cover for a fugitive. If Miss Grayson's figure exists, he did not come from the village. We arrived at the manor to find Lestrade already there, his mood soured by a sleepless night. He was interrogating Anna, the maid, whose nervous demeanor had not improved since our last meeting. Holmes listened in silence as she repeated her story. She had been in the kitchen, preparing the professor's evening tea, when the cry rang. Out she saw no one, heard nothing beyond the household's commotion. Yet Holmes's eyes lingered on her hands, which clutched a damp cloth, and I noticed again the faint nicotine stains on her fingers. Miss Anna, Holmes said abruptly, "You are fond of tobacco, are you not?" The girl started, her eyes widening. "No, sir, I don't smoke. Never have." Holmes's smile was thin. Yet your fingers tell a different tale. The scent of tobacco clings to you, and not the common shag of the village. It is something finer, perhaps foreign. Be truthful, now. It will save us time. Anna's face flushed, and she looked away, her voice barely audible. I sometimes fetch cigarettes for the professor. He likes the Russian ones. I don't smoke them, sir. I swear. Holmes nodded, as if satisfied, but I knew he had marked her words for further scrutiny. We left her and proceeded to the garden, where Holmes resumed his examination of the footprints. The rain had softened them, but their outline remained. A man's boots, size 10, with a worn heel. Holmes followed their path to the copse, where he found a second clue, a scrap of cloth, dark and coarse, caught on a thorn. He held it up, sniffing it briefly. Wool, Watson, and treated with a chemical, possibly creosote. This is no gentleman's garment. I glanced at the trees, their branches swaying in the breeze. Could this belong to the killer, or is it merely a poacher's rag, as Mrs. Marker suggested? Holmes tucked the cloth into his pocket. Poachers do not wear creosote-treated wool, nor do they linger near a murder scene. This is deliberate, Watson. Our man was here, and he left in haste. Back inside, Holmes requested a private audience with Professor Crom, who received us in his cluttered study, a room adjacent to the one where Hopkins had died. The professor's wheelchair creaked as he adjusted his position, his sharp eyes watching Holmes with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The room was a treasure trove of antiquities, manuscripts piled haphazardly, a bronze statuette of some Eastern deity, and a curious map pinned to the wall, its edges yellowed with age. Mr. Holmes, Coram said, his voice dry as parchment. I trust you are making progress. This tragedy has disrupted my work, and I am eager to see it resolved. Holmes's gaze lingered on the map, which depicted a region I could not immediately place. Your work, Professor, appears to be of great scope. May I ask its nature? Coram's lips tightened. I study ancient texts, particularly those of the Near East. My current project involves deciphering a series of cuneiform tablets. It is of no relevance to your inquiry. On the contrary, Holmes said smoothly, everything is relevant, until proven otherwise. Tell me, do you correspond with colleagues abroad? Russia, perhaps? The professor's hand twitched, a fleeting sign of unease. I have contacts in many countries, Mr. Holmes. My work requires it. But I fail to see your cigarettes, Holmes interrupted. They are Russian, are they not? A rare brand in these parts. Coram's eyes narrowed, a small indulgence. I acquire them through a London importer. Surely you do not suspect me of involvement in this sordid affair. Holmes smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. I suspect only the facts, Professor, and the facts suggest that this house holds secrets beyond a single murder. I shall return tomorrow. As we left the manor, Holmes's mood was one of quiet exhilaration, the kind that came when a case began to yield its hidden threads. The lens, Watson, he said, as we walked the lane to the inn. It is the pivot on which this mystery turns. We must find its owner, and we must learn why Professor Coram, a scholar of ancient texts, smokes Russian cigarettes and keeps a map of the Black Sea coast. There is a connection here, and I mean to find it. That night, as the fog thickened, outside, Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe forgotten, his mind lost in the labyrinth of clues. I watched him, knowing that the clue of the Pince-Nez was but the first step in a journey that would lead us into shadows far deeper than I could yet imagine. Chapter 4. The professor's secret. The morning broke over Yoxley with a reluctant sun, its rays piercing the fog in feeble shafts that did little to dispel the gloom clinging to the Kentish countryside. Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the parlour of the Red Lion, the remnants of a hasty breakfast scattered across the table. Holmes was in one of his restless moods, his fingers drumming an irregular tattoo on the arm of his chair, his eyes fixed on the small envelope containing the lens fragment he had found in the study. The scrap of creosote-treated cloth and the coded paper from the desk lay beside it, silent witnesses to the mystery that had drawn us to Yoxley Old Place. I, Dr. John Watson, sensed that we were on the cusp of a revelation, though the shape of it remained elusive, shrouded in the same mist that enveloped the manor. Holmes rose abruptly, his lean frame taut with purpose. "Come, Watson," he said, slipping the envelope into his pocket. "The professor awaits us, and I suspect he holds a piece of this puzzle, whether he knows it or not." His reticence yesterday was telling. Those sharp eyes betrayed more than his words. We set out for the manor, the lane slick with dew, and the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Yoxley Old Place loomed ahead, its grey walls seeming to absorb the light, its windows like unblinking eyes watching our approach. The great oak door creaked open under Mrs. Marker's hand, her face as unyielding as ever, though I detected a flicker of unease in her glance as she ushered us inside. The hall was dim, the chandelier unlit, and the faint acrid temps I had noticed before lingered, sharper now, as if some chemical process were at work in the shadows. Holmes requested an immediate audience with Professor Coram, and we were led to his private study, a room that seemed to exist in a different century from the rest of the house. The air was thick with the must of old books and the faint, exotic aroma of Russian cigarettes. Shelves groaned under the weight of manuscripts, their pages brittle and yellowed, while a cluttered table held an array of curios, a clay tablet inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, a tarnished astrolabe, and a small vial of amber liquid that caught Holmes's eye. The professor himself sat in his wheelchair, his frail form wrapped in a shawl, his hands folded like a scholar guarding his secrets. Yet his eyes, bright and piercing, followed Holmes with a wariness that bordered on defiance. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes," Dr. Watson Coram said, his voice thin but steady. "I trust you have made progress in your inquiry. This tragedy has cast a pall over my work, and I am eager for its resolution." Holmes took a seat without invitation, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the professor. "Your work, Professor, interests me greatly," he said, his tone deceptively. "Mild cuneiform tablets, I see. A rare pursuit for a retired scholar in Kent. Tell me, do your studies extend to modern correspondence, perhaps with colleagues in the East?" Coram's fingers tightened on the arms of his chair, a subtle movement that did not escape Holmes's. "Notice, my studies are academic, Mr. Holmes," he replied. "I correspond with scholars, yes, but my work is confined to the past. I have no interest in modern affairs." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And yet, Professor, your cigarette suggests otherwise. Russian, are they not? A brand not easily procured in this corner of England. And this map," he gestured to the wall, where the chart of the Black Sea coast hung, its edges curling. "With age, it is not the work of a casual traveller. The annotations are in Cyrillic, a script not commonly studied in Kentish manors." Coram's face remained impassive, but a faint flush crept into his cheeks. "You are observant, Mr. Holmes. The cigarettes are a small indulgence, sent by a colleague in St. Petersburg. The map is a relic of my travels, nothing more. I fail to see their relevance to poor Hopkins's death. Holmes's smile was cold. Relevance, Professor, is a matter of perspective. Allow me to propose a hypothesis. Stanley Hopkins was killed, not for personal enmity, but because he stumbled upon something, perhaps a letter, a document, or a secret that threatened someone's interests. The broken window latch, the footprints in the garden, and this. He produced the lens fragment, holding it up so that it glinted in the dim light. Suggest an intruder, but one who knew the house well enough to strike swiftly and escape unnoticed. You, sir, are a man of secrets. What did Hopkins find in your study? Coram's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might protest. But he sank back in his chair, his expression one of weary resignation. You are a formidable man, Mr. Holmes, he said softly. Very well, I will tell you what I know, but I warn you, it will not solve your case. I am, as you suspect, more than a mere scholar. In my youth, I served as a diplomat in Russia, under the Tsar's court. I made enemies, powerful ones, who have not forgotten me, even in my retirement. I keep to myself here, but I maintain certain correspondences to ensure my safety. Holmes's gaze did not waver. And Hopkins, did he discover these correspondences? Coram hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. It is possible. He was a curious young man, always poking about the study. 2 days before his death, I found him at my desk, reading a letter he had no business touching. I reprimanded him, but he swore he meant no harm. I thought little of it until this tragedy. What was in the letter? Holmes pressed. Coram shook his head. Nothing of consequence, a note from an old colleague, written in Russian. But Hopkins was clever. He might have gleaned something from it, something that put him in danger. Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Professor. Your candor, belated though it is noted. I shall need access to your correspondence, particularly any letters in Russian. Coram's face hardened. That, Mr. Holmes, I cannot allow. They are private and irrelevant to your inquiry. Holmes did not argue, but as we left the study, he murmured to me, he is lying, Watson, or at least not telling the whole truth. That burn mark on the rug fresh, and from a cigarette suggests he was in the study the night of the murder, despite his claim of remaining in his rooms, and the letter Hopkins read may hold the key to this affair. We returned to the garden, where Holmes examined the footprints again, noting their depth and the angle of the strides. Our intruder was tall, he said, and moved with purpose, not panic. He knew where he was going. He paused at the copse, where the scrap of creosote-treated cloth had been found, and his eyes scanned the ground for further traces. There, half buried in the mud, was a small metal object, a cufflink, its surface engraved with a curious symbol, like a crossed sword and quill. Holmes held it up, his face alight with interest. This, Watson, is no poacher's trinket. The design is Eastern, possibly Russian. Our shadowy figure grows more distinct. Back at the inn, Holmes dispatched a telegram to a contact in London, requesting information on Russian émigré circles and their symbols. He then turned his attention to the coded paper, spending hours poring over it with a cipher book he had brought from Baker Street. It is not a simple substitution, he muttered, nor a visionaire. It may require a key text, perhaps one of the professor's manuscripts. As night fell, the fog thickened, wrapping Yoxley in a cocoon of silence. Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe forgotten, his mind weaving the threads of the case, the lens, the footprints, the cufflink, the burn mark, and now the professor's reluctant admission of a past in Russian diplomacy. "Coram is the fulcrum, Watson," he said at last. "His secrets are the motive for this murder, whether he admits it or not. Tomorrow we must press him further and find the owner of that lens, for I am certain it belongs to someone close to this house." I retired to my room, the weight of the day's discoveries heavy upon me. As I drifted into sleep, the image of Professor Coram's sharp eyes and the glint of that cufflink haunted my dreams, hinting at a secret that lay just beyond our grasp, waiting to be uncovered in the shadowed halls of Yoxley Old Place. Chapter 5. The shadow in the garden. The night was black as pitch, with a chill wind rustling the leaves in the garden of Yoxley Old Place, as Sherlock Holmes and I took up our vigil among the dripping shrubs. The fog that had plagued Kent for days had lifted, leaving a sky pricked with stars, though their light did little to pierce the darkness that enveloped the manor. Holmes, clad in a dark overcoat, crouched beside me, his eyes fixed on the shadowed outline of the house, where a single lamp burned in the study window. I, Dr. John Watson, clutched my service revolver, my nerves taut with the anticipation of what might emerge from the night. The events of the Dather professor's reluctant confession, the cufflink with its cryptic symbol, and the ever-present mystery of the lens fragment had convinced Holmes that the key to the murder of Stanley Hopkins lay not within the manor's walls but in the secrets that moved through its grounds after dark. Holmes had proposed the watch with characteristic decisiveness, his mind alight with the threads of the case. "The footprints, Watson," he had said as we dined at the Red Lion, "and that creosote-treated cloth suggest a visitor who knows the manor well. Miss Grayson's shadowy figure may be more than a frightened governess's fancy. If our intruder returns, we shall have him." We had slipped out of the inn under cover of dusk, taking a circuitous path through the village to avoid notice. Now, hidden in a thicket of rhododendrons near the study window, we waited in silence. The only sounds the distant hoot of an owl and the soft drip of moisture from the leaves. Holmes's presence beside me was a study in stillness, his breathing shallow, his senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. I, less accustomed to such vigils, shifted occasionally to ease the cramp in my legs. Earning a faint reproving glance from my friend, the hours crept by, and my thoughts wandered to the professor's words, his past in Russian diplomacy, the letter Hopkins had read, the map of the Black Sea coast. What had the young tutor stumbled upon that cost him his life? And what of the lens fragment, that delicate clue that seemed to point to Miss Grayson's golden Pince-Nez, yet refused to fit neatly into Holmes's emerging theory? The cufflink, with its crossed sword and quill, hinted at a larger conspiracy, one that stretched beyond the quiet lanes of Kent to the murky intrigues of foreign courts. A faint sound broke my reverie, a rustle, not of wind, but of movement. From the direction of the manor's side door, Holmes's hand gripped my arm, his touch light but firm, signaling absolute silence. The door creaked open, a sliver of light spilling onto the gravel path, and a figure emerged, moving with a stealth that bespoke familiarity with the grounds. It was slight, cloaked in a dark shawl, and carried a small bundle clutched tightly to its chest. The figure paused, glancing about, then made for the copse of trees where Holmes had found the cloth and cufflink. Holmes sprang forward, his movements swift and noiseless, and I followed, my revolver at the ready. We closed the distance in moments, and Holmes seized the figure by the arm, spinning it around. A gasp escaped the cloaked form, and the shawl fell back to reveal Anna, the maid, her face pale with terror in the starlight. The bundle slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the grass. "Miss Anna Holmes said," his voice low but commanding. "You have some explaining to do. What brings you to the garden at this hour, and what is in that packet?" Anna's eyes darted from Holmes to me, her breath coming in short gasps. "Please, sir," she whispered, "I meant no harm. I was only doing as I was told." Holmes retrieved the bundle, a small canvas bag tied with twine. He opened it to reveal a sheaf of papers, their edges marked with a script I recognized as Cyrillic. "Russian," he said, his tone grim. "Letters, and not the scholarly kind. Who instructed you to deliver these, and to whom?" Anna sank to her knees, her hands wringing together. "It was the professor, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "He gives me letters sometimes, to take to a man in the village, a stranger who meets me at the old mill. I don't know his name, I swear, I just do as I'm told." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing through the implications. "And this stranger, what does he look like?" "Tall," Sir Anna replied, "with a beard and a heavy coat. He speaks with an accent, like the professor's cigarette smell. I never see his face clear, for he keeps to the shadows." Glanced at Holmes, recalling Miss Grayson's description of the figure in the garden. "Could this be our intruder?" I asked. "Very likely," Holmes said, helping Anna to her feet. "Miss Anna, you have been drawn into a dangerous game. When did you last deliver such a packet?" "2 nights ago, sir," she said, her eyes wide. "The night Mr. Hopkins was killed. I saw someone near the study window as I came back, a tall man, like the one I meet. I thought he was the same, but I was frightened and ran inside." Holmes's face was a mask of concentration. "You have done well to tell us this. Return to the house, and speak of this to no one, not even the professor. Your safety depends on it." Anna nodded, her face still pale, and hurried back to the manor, her shawl trailing behind her. Holmes examined the letters, his fingers tracing the Cyrillic script. "These are no mere correspondences, Watson," he said. "They are coded, and their contents are likely of a nature to provoke violence. Hopkins may have seen one such letter, or overheard Anna's errand, and paid the ultimate price." We returned to our hiding place, but the night yielded no further visitors. At dawn, we made our way back to the Red Lion, Holmes carrying the canvas bag with care. In the parlor, he spread the letters on the table, his cipher book open beside them. "The code is complex," he muttered, "but it resembles those used in diplomatic dispatches. I shall need time to decipher it, but one thing is clear. Professor Coram is no retired scholar. He is a conduit for secrets, and his Russian connections are at the heart of this murder." I frowned, the weight of Anna's confession settling upon me. But why kill Hopkins? If he read a letter, surely he could not have understood its import. Holmes's eyes glinted in the lamplight. "He understood enough, Watson, to make someone fear exposure. The cufflink suggests an agent of some foreign power, Russian, perhaps, or one of its rivals. The creosote cloth points to a man who moves in industrial circles, perhaps a dock worker or smuggler, and the lens fragments still are most tantalizing. Clue implies a witness or participant who left a piece of themselves behind." He paused, his gaze distant. "Anna's stranger is our shadowy figure, I am certain. He came to the manor that night, perhaps to retrieve a letter Hopkins had seen and struck when the tutor confronted him. But why the study? And why leave the lens? These are the questions we must answer." Holmes dispatched a second telegram to London, this time requesting details on Russian agents known to operate in England. He then turned to the coded paper. from the desk, comparing its numbers to the letters from Anna's bundle. "The numbers may be a key," he said, "or a reference to a specific text. We must search the professor's library tomorrow, but discreetly. Coram is wary, and he may destroy evidence if he suspects we are close." As the morning sun climbed higher, banishing the last of the night's chill, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The shadow in the garden was no longer a phantom, but a man of flesh and blood, tied to the professor's secrets and the murder of Stanley Hopkins. Yet the lens fragment, that delicate shard of glass, remained a riddle, pointing to someone, perhaps Miss Grayson, perhaps another who had been in the study at the moment of death. Holmes's mind was a furnace, forging connections from the scattered clues, and I knew that the next day would bring us closer to the truth, or plunge us deeper into the web of intrigue that surrounded Yoxley Old Place. Chapter 6. The Russian Connection. The dawn broke over Yoxley with a crisp clarity that belied the murky tangle of secrets we had uncovered the previous night. Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the parlour of the Red Lion, the canvas bag of letters spread across the table, their cryptic script a silent challenge to Holmes's relentless intellect. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the oak-panelled walls, while outside, the village stirred to life under a sky of pale blue. Holmes, his pipe unlit but clenched between his teeth, pored over the coded paper from the study, his brow furrowed in concentration. I, Dr. John Watson, watched him, my mind still reeling from Anna's confession in the garden and the growing certainty that the murder of Stanley Hopkins was but a thread in a far larger tapestry. Holmes set down the paper, his eyes gleaming with the fire of discovery. "These letters, Watson," he said, tapping the bundle, "are no mere academic exchanges. They are dispatches, coded in a manner used by those who trade in secrets. The numbers on the desk paper 41 to 7, the 3rd of September 15, and so forth are likely a key to their decipherment, but I shall need a specific text to unlock them. Professor Coram's library is our next destination." I nodded, recalling the professor's guarded demeanour and the burn mark on his rug. "You believe Coram is at the centre of this? His diplomatic past, the Russian cigarettes, the map, they all point to something clandestine." "Precisely," Holmes replied, rising and donning his overcoat. "Coram is no retired scholar, whatever he claims. He is a linchpin in a network that stretches to Russia, and Hopkins's death was no random act of violence. The young tutor saw something, perhaps one of these letters, and it cost him his life. Come, we must return to the manor and press our advantage." The lane to Yoxley Old Place was quiet, the morning air sharp with the scent of wet grass and wood smoke. The manor loomed ahead, its grey stone walls seeming to absorb the sunlight, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Mrs. Marker met us at the door, her face as stern as ever, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. "The professor is in his study," she said curtly. "He's not been himself since your last visit, Mr. Holmes." Holmes gave her a piercing glance. "And you, Mrs. Marker, have you been yourself?" Her lips tightened, but she said nothing, leading us through the dim hall to Coram's private study. The room was unchanged, its air heavy with the must of old books and the faint temps of Russian tobacco. The professor sat in his wheelchair, a manuscript open before him, though his hands were idle, and his sharp eyes fixed on us with a mixture of resignation and defiance. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice dry as autumn leaves, "you are persistent. I have told you what I know. What more do you seek?" Holmes took a seat, his manner deceptively casual. "The truth, Professor. You admitted to a past in Russian diplomacy, to enemies who might still pursue you. Yet you failed to mention the letters, the coded dispatches that Anna delivers to a stranger at the old mill. One such letter, I suspect, was seen by Stanley Hopkins, and it led to his death. Who is your contact, and what do these letters contain? Coram's face paled, his fingers clutching the arms of his chair. You overstep, Mr. Holmes, he said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. My correspondences are private, and I will not have them scrutinized by a meddling detective. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his voice cold as steel. A man is dead, Professor, and your secrets are the cause. I have the letters taken from Anna last night. They are in Cyrillic, coded, and linked to a man who wears a cufflink, marked with a sword and quill symbol, not unknown in Russian circles. Speak, or I shall take this to Scotland Yard, and your privacy will be the least of your concerns. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel. Then Coram sighed, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had settled upon them. Very well, he said softly. I will tell you what. I can, but I warn you, it is a dangerous path you tread. In my years in Russia, I served not only as a diplomat, but as an intermediary for certain factions, men who sought to influence the Tsar's court, or to undermine it. When I retired, I came here to escape their reach, but some ties cannot be broken. The letters are reports, sent to an agent in London, detailing movements of certain emigres in England. I am a conduit, nothing more. And Hopkins, Holmes pressed. What did he see? Coram hesitated, his eyes darting to the map on the wall. He was a curious fool, he said at last. 2 days before his death, I caught him at my desk, reading a letter meant for my contact. It contained namesmen of influence, now in England, who were watched by those in St. Petersburg. Hopkins asked questions, too many questions. I told him to forget what he had seen, but he was stubborn. I did not kill him, Mr. Holmes, but I fear his curiosity drew the attention of someone who did. Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled before his lips. This agent in London, who is he? Coram shook his head. I know him only as Voron, the Raven. He meets Anna at the mill, or sends another in his place. I have never seen his face. Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. You have given us a thread, Professor, but it is a fragile one. I shall need access to your library to find the text that unlocks your code, and I warn you any attempt to destroy evidence will be met with consequences. Coram nodded wearily, as if the fight had gone out of him. Take what you need, Mr. Holmes, but be cautious. The men I deal with do not forgive interference. We spent the morning in the professor's library, a vast room filled with tomes in a dozen languages, their spines bearing titles that spoke of ancient empires and forgotten scripts. Holmes moved methodically, scanning shelves for a book that might serve as the cipher's key. I assisted, though my knowledge of such matters was limited, and my attention was drawn to a small volume bound in black leather, its title in Cyrillic. Holmes seized it, his eyes alight with recognition. This, Watson, he said, is a collection of Russian diplomatic correspondence, published in St. Petersburg in 1880. It may be our key. Back at the Red Lion, Holmes set to work, using the book to test the coded numbers. After hours of painstaking effort, he deciphered a fragment of one letter, a list of names, dates, and locations, all in England, with annotations suggesting surveillance. "These are Russian emigres," Holmes said, his voice grim. "Men who fled the Tsar's regime, now watched by agents loyal to it." Hopkins saw this, or something like it, and it marked him for death. I felt a chill, not from the fires, dying embers, but from the realization that we were entangled in a web of international intrigue. "But who killed him?" I asked. "This Voron, or another?" Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind racing through possibilities. "Voron, or his agent, is our man in the garden. The cufflink, the creosote cloth, the footprints all point to a professional, someone accustomed to moving unseen. But the lens fragment complicates matters. It suggests another presence in the study, someone who fled in haste. Miss Grayson remains a possibility, though her story holds for now." He rose, pacing the room. "We must find this Voron, Watson. He is the key to the murder and to the professor's secrets. Tomorrow we shall set a trap at the old mill, using Anna's next delivery as bait. But we must move carefully. These are men who kill without hesitation." As night fell, the weight of Coram's confession and the deciphered letter settled upon me. The Russian connection was no longer a theory but a reality, linking the quiet manor to the shadowy world of espionage. Yet the lens fragment, that delicate shard of glass, remained a puzzle, hinting at a truth that lay just beyond our reach. Holmes sat by the window, his silhouette sharp against the starlit sky, and I knew that the shadow in the garden was closer than ever to revealing itself. Chapter 7. The Broken Lens. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the Red Lion's parlour, casting a delicate pattern on the table where Sherlock Holmes sat, his keen eyes fixed on the small envelope containing the lens fragment. The air was sharp with the promise of autumn, and the village of Yoxley stirred quietly beyond the inn's walls. I, Dr. John Watson, sipped my coffee, my thoughts heavy with the revelations of the previous day, the professor's clandestine role, the coded Russian dispatches, and the shadowy figure of Voron, the Raven, who seemed to haunt the grounds of Yoxley Old Place. Yet it was the lens, that tiny shard of glass, that held Holmes's attention, as if it were a cipher more intricate than the letters we had intercepted. Holmes held the fragment to the light, its edges glinting with a clarity that belied its small size. "This lens, Watson," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "is the pivot of our mystery. It is no common glass, but a prescription of rare precision, likely from a Pince-Nez. Its presence in the study suggests a witness or a participant who fled the scene of Hopkins's murder. We must find its owner, and today we shall begin with Miss Eleanor Grayson." I set down my cup, surprised by his focus. "Miss Grayson, you suspect her, then?" Her story seemed earnest, and she came to us for help. Holmes's lips curved in a faint smile, though his eyes remained hard. "Earnestness, Watson, is the cloak of many a secret. Her golden Pince-Nez caught my eye in Baker Street, and her agitation when I asked about them was telling. She claims to have been in her room when Hopkins was killed, yet she saw a figure in the gardener, convenient detail, perhaps, to divert suspicion. The lens may prove her innocence or her guilt." He rose, slipping the envelope into his pocket. "Alongside the cufflink and the creosote-treated cloth, we shall visit the optician in the village first to confirm the lens's origin. Then we return to the manor to observe Miss Grayson's reaction. Her pince-nez are the key, I am certain." The village optician, a Mr. Hargreaves, occupied a narrow shop wedged between a bakery and a cobbler's. His windows displayed an array of spectacles, their frames gleaming in the morning sun. Hargreaves, A wiry man with a jeweler's loop dangling from his neck examined the lens fragment with professional curiosity. "This is fine work," he said, turning it under a magnifying lamp. "It's from a Pince-Nez, no doubt, with a strong corrective prescription uncommon in these parts. The glass is imported, likely from Germany, and the curvature suggests it was custom-made." Holmes leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Have you crafted such a lens recently, Mr. Hargreaves? For a lady, perhaps, with golden Pince-Nez?" Hargreaves frowned, consulting a ledger. "I recall only one such order, sir, for Miss Eleanor Grayson, the governess at Yoxley Old Place. She came to me last year, needing a replacement lens for her Pince-Nez. The frame was gold, a fine piece, and the prescription matched this fragment's strength. But I'd need to see her spectacles to be certain." Holmes thanked him, his expression unreadable, and we set out for the manor. The lane was alive with the chatter of birds, but my thoughts were troubled. If the lens belonged to Miss Grayson, had she been in the study at the moment of murder? And if so, why conceal it? Yoxley Old Place greeted us with its usual air of brooding silence, its ivy-clad walls absorbing the sunlight as if jealous of its warmth. Mrs. Marker, ever the stern sentinel, admitted us, her eyes lingering on Holmes with a wariness that had grown since our first visit. "Miss Grayson is in the schoolroom," she said, her voice clipped. "She's with the children, but I'll fetch her." Holmes waved a hand. "No need, Mrs. Marker. We shall go to her. I prefer to observe her in her natural setting." The schoolroom was a bright, airy space on the manor's second floor, its windows overlooking the garden where we had intercepted Anna. Miss Grayson stood at a blackboard, chalk in hand, explaining a passage from Milton to two young girls, her manner calm but tinged with fatigue. Her golden Pince-Nez gleamed on their chain about her neck, though she wore them not, relying instead on a pair of plain spectacles perched on her nose. She started at our entrance, her chalk pausing mid-stroke. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of alarm. "I did not expect you. Have you news of Willoughby Smith?" Holmes smiled, his gaze fixed on her Pince-Nez. "Some progress, Miss Grayson, but I require your assistance. May we speak privately?" She dismissed the children, who scurried off with curious glances, and we took seats at a small table littered with books and papers. Holmes produced the lens fragment, placing it before her with deliberate care. "This was found in the study where Hopkins was killed," he said. "It is from a Pince-Nez, much like yours. Can you explain its presence?" Miss Grayson's face paled, her fingers tightening around the chain of her spectacles. "I don't understand," she stammered. "My Pince-Nez are here, intact. They have not been broken." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Permit me to examine them, if you please." She hesitated, then unhooked the chain and handed the Pince-Nez to him. Holmes studied them through his magnifying glass, his fingers tracing the lenses and frame. "These are indeed intact," he said, "but one lens is newer than the other. Replaced within the year. Mr. Hargreaves confirmed your order. Tell me, Miss Grayson, were your Pince-Nez ever damaged, say, on the night of the murder?" Her hands trembled, and she looked away, her voice barely audible. I lost a lens that night, Mr. Holmes, but not in the study. I was in the garden, searching for a brooch I had dropped earlier. It was dark, and I stumbled, and my Pince-Nez fell. One lens shattered, and I retrieved the frame, but could not find the pieces. I swear I was not in the study when Mr. Hopkins died. Holmes leaned back, his expression inscrutable. "And the figure you saw in the garden, describe him again." She swallowed, her eyes meeting his with effort. Tall, cloaked, moving quickly toward the woods. I could not see his face, but he was no one I knew. I was frightened and returned to the house. Holmes handed back the Pince-Nez, his voice softening. "You have withheld this, Miss Grayson, and it has complicated matters. Why did you not tell the police of your presence in the garden?" "I feared they would suspect me," she whispered. "I am a governess, Mr. Holmes, dependent on my reputation. To be linked to a murder, even as a witness, would ruin me." Holmes rose, pocketing the lens fragment. "Your candor, belated though it is noted. Remain at the manor, Miss Grayson. I may have further questions." As we left the schoolroom, Holmes's mood was one of quiet satisfaction, though his brow remained furrowed. "The lens is hers, Watson," he said as we descended the stairs. "Her story explains its presence, but it raises new questions. If she was in the garden, why did the fragment end up in the study? Was it carried there by the killer, or is Miss Grayson's tale a fabrication to cover her own involvement?" We paused in the hall, where Holmes's gaze fell on a small table, bearing a vase of wilted roses. Beside it lay a single petal, its edge singed as if by a flame. He picked it up, sniffing it briefly. "Tobacco ash," he murmured. "Russian, like the professor's cigarettes. Someone was here recently, and careless." Outside, Holmes examined the garden near the study window, searching for traces of Miss Grayson's stumble. The ground was soft, and he found a faint indentation, as if a knee had pressed into the earth, alongside a few shards of glass, too small to be the lens fragment. "Her story holds, for now," he said. "But the singed petal suggests another presence, someone smoking in the hall, perhaps watching the garden." Back at the Red Lion, Holmes received a reply to his telegram from London, detailing Russian emigre networks and their symbols. The cufflinks, sword and quill was identified as the mark of a secretive group. The Order of the Black Raven, known for espionage and assassination in the Tsar's service. "Voron," Holmes said, his voice grim. "Our man in the garden is no common agent. He is a killer, sent to silence Hopkins and protect the professor's network." I felt a chill, the weight of the case pressing upon me. "But Miss Lens, how does it fit?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with the fire of pursuit. "It is a bridge, Watson, between the garden and the study. Either Miss Grayson lied, and she was in the study, or the killer took the lens as he fled, perhaps unknowingly. Tomorrow, we set our trap at the old mill. Voron will come for the next dispatch, and we shall have him and the truth of the broken lens." As night fell, the mystery of Yoxley Old Place seemed to tighten around us, its secrets woven into the lens, the cufflink, and the singed petal. Holmes sat by the fire, his mind a furnace of deduction, and I knew that the shadow of Voron was drawing closer, ready to step into the light. Chapter 8. The chase to London. The morning air in Yoxley was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint tank of wood smoke as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to depart the Red Lion. The revelations of the previous day, Miss Eleanor Grayson's admission about her broken Pince-Nez, and the deepening web of Russian intrigue surrounding Professor Coram had set Holmes's mind ablaze with purpose. He stood by the parlour window, his lean silhouette sharp against the pale light, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the sill. I, Dr. John Watson, packed our few belongings, my thoughts troubled by the image of Miss Grayson's trembling hands and the singed rose petal that hinted at an unseen watcher in the manor's hall. Holmes turned, his eyes glinting with the intensity of a hunter closing on his quarry. Miss Grayson's story, Watson, is a thread in our tapestry, but it frays at the edges, he said, slipping the lens fragment into his pocket alongside the cufflink and creosote-treated cloth. Her broken Pince-Nez explains the glass in the study, yet her presence in the garden raises questions. Was she truly searching for a brooch, or was she closer to the murder than she admits? And that singed petal Russian tobacco, like Coram's cigarette, suggests someone else was near, perhaps observing her. We must find her again, for she holds more secrets than she has yet revealed. I frowned, recalling her earnest plea in Baker Street. But she's at the manor, Holmes. Why not question her there? Holmes shook his head, his voice low and urgent. She is not at the manor, Watson. I made inquiries with the innkeeper this morning. Miss Grayson left Yoxley by the early train, bound for London. Her sudden departure is no coincidence. She is either fleeing danger or concealing guilt. We must follow her, and quickly. We caught the next train from Yoxley Station, a rattling affair that carried us through the Kentish countryside, its fields shrouded in a lingering mist. Holmes sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, though I knew his mind was racing through the clues. The lens, the cufflink, the coded dispatches, and now Miss Grayson's flight. I occupied myself with a newspaper, but the headlines of political unrest in Europe only deepened my sense of unease. The Russian connection, with its shadowy agents and cryptic symbols, seemed to pulse beneath the surface of our case, threatening to draw us into a world far beyond the quiet lanes of Kent. We arrived at Charing Cross in the early afternoon, the station a hive of activity as travellers bustled beneath its iron arches. Holmes moved with purpose, his long strides carrying him through the crowd as he hailed a hansom cab. To Bloomsbury, he instructed the driver, Gordon Square, and make haste. I raised an eyebrow as we climbed aboard. Bloomsbury. How do you know where she's gone? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. A simple deduction, Watson. Miss Grayson is a governess, accustomed to modest means. Bloomsbury is a haven for such women boarding houses that cater to teachers and clerks, affordable yet respectable. I wired ahead to a contact at the station, who confirmed a woman matching her description took a cab to Gordon Square this morning. She is not hiding, but she is running. The cab rattled through London streets, past the grand facades of Regent Street and the quieter squares of Bloomsbury, where plane trees cast dappled shadows on the pavements. We alighted at a modest boarding house, its brick exterior faded but clean, its windows adorned with starched curtains. The landlady, a stout woman with a shrewd gaze, confirmed that a Miss Grayson had taken a room that morning, paying for a week in advance. She's upstairs, sir, she said, eyeing Holmes with curiosity. Keeps to herself, but she seemed in a right state when she arrived. We ascended the narrow staircase to a small room on the second floor, its door ajar. Miss Grayson sat at a writing desk, her back to us, her pen scratching furiously across a sheet of paper. Her golden pince-nez, now repaired with a new lens, rested on the desk beside her, their chain glinting in the light from a single lamp. She started at our knock, turning with a gasp, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, rising, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I did not expect you. Why have you come?" Holmes stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the sparse furnishings of a narrow bed, a wardrobe, a small trunk before settling on her. You left Yoxley without a word, Miss Grayson, he said, his tone mild but edged with steel. A curious choice for a woman who sought my help to save an innocent man. I showed you the lens fragment yesterday, and you admitted it was yours, lost in the garden. Yet now you flee to London. What are you hiding? Miss Grayson sank into her chair, her fingers clutching the edge of the desk. I am hiding nothing, Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice low. I left Yoxley because I feared for my safety. After our talk, I realized how close I had come to danger that night. The figure in the garden, he saw me, I am certain. I could not stay, not with the professor's secrets and that terrible murder hanging over the house. Holmes drew the lens fragment from his pocket, holding it up so that it caught the lamplight. This was found in the study, Miss Grayson, not the garden. Your story explains the broken Pince-Nez, but not how this shard came to be where Hopkins died. Were you in the study that night? Speak plainly, or I shall draw my own conclusions. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might faint, but she drew a deep breath, her resolve hardening. I was not in the study when Mr. Hopkins was killed, she said, her voice firm. But I was there earlier that evening, before the cry was heard. I went to fetch a book for the children's lessons, and I heard voices, Mr. Hopkins and another, a man with a heavy accent, arguing. I did not stay, for I feared to be seen, but as I left, my Pince-Nez caught on the doorframe, and the lens broke. I gathered the pieces I could find and fled to the garden, searching for my brooch to calm my nerves. That is when I saw the figure running toward the woods. Holmes's gaze was unyielding, his mind sifting her words for truth. This man with the accent, who was he? I could not see his face, she said, her voice trembling. He was tall, with a beard, and his voice was harsh, like the stranger Anna spoke of. I thought he was one of the professor's visitors, but I did not know his name. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. You heard their argument. What was it about? Miss Grayson hesitated, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting to see that bearded figure in the street below. It was about a letter, she said at last. Mr. Hopkins was angry, saying he had seen something he could not. Ignore names, he said, of men who were in danger. The other man laughed, but it was a cruel sound, and then I heard a scuffle. I ran, Mr. Holmes, and I swear I did not see the murder. Holmes sat back, his fingers steepled before his lips, his expression inscrutable. You have withheld much, Miss Grayson, and it has cost us time. This man you heard, Voren, or one of his agents, is the killer, I am certain. Your lens, left in the study, was carried there by your own hand. Not the murderer's, but your silence has protected him and endangered others. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I was afraid, Mr. Holmes. I am only a governess, with no one to protect me. I thought if I came to London, I could escape it all. Holmes rose, his voice softening. Fear is no crime, Miss Grayson, but silence can be. Remain here and speak to no one until I return. Your testimony may yet save Willoughby Smith. As we left the boarding house, the London streets were alive with the clatter of cabs and the cries of newsboys. But Holmes's mind was elsewhere, weaving the threads of Miss Grayson's story into the larger pattern. She speaks the truth, Watson, he said as we hailed another cab. Her lens was broken in the study, and her fear kept her silent. The argument she overheard confirms our theory. Hopkins saw a letter naming Russian emigres, and Voren killed him to ensure his silence. But we are close now. We must return to Yoxley and set our trap at the old mill. I glanced at him, my heart quickening at the prospect of confronting the shadowy raven. And Miss Grayson, is she safe here? Holmes's eyes darkened. For now, Watson. But Warren is a hunter, and he does not forget a witness. We must move swiftly, or London may prove no safer than Yoxley. The cab carried us back to Charing Cross, the city's pulse a stark contrast to the quiet menace of the manor we would soon face again. The chase to London had yielded a crucial truth. The broken lens was Miss Grayson's, and her story pointed to Warren, but the shadow of the Russian agent loomed larger than ever, his presence a silent threat in the heart of the empire. Chapter 9. The Man in the Shadows. The train from Charing Cross bore us back to Yoxley, through a twilight that seemed to mirror the gathering darkness of our case. Sherlock Holmes sat opposite me, his lean frame taut with anticipation, his eyes fixed on the fleeting Kentish landscape, though I knew his mind was elsewhere, weaving together the threads of Miss Grayson's confession, the Russian dispatches, and the elusive figure of Warren, the Raven. I, Dr. John Watson, gripped my revolver in my coat pocket, my nerves steeled for the trap we were to set at the old mill, where Anna's next delivery might draw the killer into. The open, the lens fragment, the cufflink, the singed petal all pointed to a conspiracy that had claimed Stanley Hopkins's life, and now threatened to ensnare us in its web. Holmes broke the silence, his voice low and deliberate. Miss Grayson's account, Watson, is a lantern in the fog, he said, tapping the envelope containing the lens fragment. Her presence in the study, overhearing Hopkins's argument with a bearded man, confirms our theory. The tutor uncovered a list of emigres, and Warren silenced him. But her flight to London suggests she fears more than she has told. We must assume Warren knows of her, and that makes her a liability to him. Tonight, we shall unmask this shadow in the garden. I nodded, the weight of our task pressing upon me. And Willoughby Smith. If Warren is the killer, Smith's innocence is clear. Holmes's lips curved in a grim smile. Clear to us, Watson, but not yet to Lestrade, the groundskeeper. Knife was a convenient plant, a distraction to obscure the true motive. Warren is a professional, trained to leave no trace save for the cufflink and the creosote cloth, which betray his presence. We shall need his confession to free Smith. We alighted at Yoxley Station under a sky bruised with clouds, the air sharp with the promise of rain. A trap carried us to the Red Lion, where Holmes dispatched a note to Inspector Lestrade, summoning him to the manor with 2 constables for the night's work. In the parlour, Holmes briefed Anna, whose pale face and trembling hands bespoke her terror at the role she was to play. You will deliver the next packet as usual, Miss Anna, Holmes instructed, his voice calm but firm. But you will not be alone. We shall be watching, and you will come to no harm. Anna nodded, clutching the canvas bag of letters. I'll do it, sir, she whispered. But that man, he frightens me. His eyes are cold, like a snake's. Holmes placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of reassurance. Courage, Miss Anna. Tonight, we end his reign of fear. The old mill stood a mile from the manor, a crumbling relic of stone and timber beside a sluggish stream. Its wheel was still, its windows dark, and the surrounding woods offered ample cover for our ambush. Holmes, Lestrade, the constables, and I took positions among the trees, our breaths misting in the chill air. Anna approached the mill alone, her shawl drawn tight, the bag clutched to her chest. The moon, half hidden by clouds, cast a fitful light, turning the scene into a tableau of shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant gurgle of the stream. Then a figure emerged from the woods opposite, tall and cloaked, his face obscured by a heavy scarf. His boots crunched on the gravel, their soles worn on the left heel, matching the footprints in the garden. My grip tightened on my revolver. As he approached Anna, his hand extended for the bag. "Now," Holmes whispered, and we sprang forward, Lestrade's whistle shrilling in the night. The man turned, his scarf slipping to reveal a bearded face, his eyes glinting with a predator's cunning. He drew a knife, its blade flashing, but Holmes was upon him, seizing his wrist with a grip of iron. The constables closed in, and after a brief struggle, the man was subdued, his hands bound with Lestrade's cuffs. Holmes tore the scarf away, revealing a gaunt face, its features sharp and weathered, with a scar tracing the left cheek. "Ivan Petrov," Holmes said, his voice cold. "Or should I say, Voron, agent of the Black Raven." Petrov's lips curled in a sneer, his accent thick but precise. "You know nothing, Englishman," he spat. "You meddle in matters beyond your reach." Holmes produced the cufflink, its sword and quill gleaming in the moonlight. "This says otherwise," he said, "as does the creosote cloth from your coat, left in the garden where you fled after killing Stanley Hopkins. Why? Did you strike him down?" Petrov's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his silence a wall of defiance. Lestrade stepped forward, his face grim. "You'll talk at Scotland Yard, my lad," he said, signaling the constables to take him away. As Petrov was led to the trap, Holmes searched his coat, finding a small notebook filled with Cyrillic script, and a second cufflink matching the first. "This will be evidence enough," Holmes said, pocketing the items. "But I suspect his masters will disavow him. The Black Raven protects its own." Back at the Red Lion, Holmes interrogated Petrov in the presence of Lestrade, his questions relentless. Under pressure, Petrov cracked, his bravado giving way to desperation. "Hopkins saw the list," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Names of men who betrayed the Tsar, now hiding in England. He threatened to expose us. I had no choice, my orders were clear. I entered through the window, struck him with the knife, and left the groundskeeper's blade to mislead you. And Miss Grayson's lens," Holmes pressed. "How came it to be in the study?" Petrov shrugged, his eyes flickering with contempt. "I know nothing of a lens. The governess was a fool, always lurking. If she dropped it, it was her own carelessness." Holmes leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You have condemned yourself, Petrov. The courts will decide your fate." As Petrov was taken to the village lockup, Lestrade clapped Holmes on the shoulder, a rare gesture of respect. "You've done it again, Holmes," he said. "Smith will be released by morning, and this Russian rogue will swing for it." Holmes nodded, but his eyes were distant, his mind still grappling with the lens fragment. "The case is nearly closed, Lestrade," he said, "but one thread remains. Miss Grayson's role is clear, yet her fear of Petrov suggests she knows more of his network than she has told. We must ensure her safety." We returned to the manor at dawn, the sky streaked with pink and gold, a stark contrast to the grim work of the night. Professor Koren, informed of Petrov's capture, sank into his wheelchair, his face a mask of relief and dread. "You have undone me, Mr. Holmes," he said softly. "My contacts will abandon me now, and my enemies will not forget." Holmes's gaze was cold. "You brought this upon yourself, Professor. Your silence cost a man's life. Cooperate with the authorities, and you may yet find mercy. As we left Yoxley Old Place, the manor seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare under the morning light. The man in the shadows had a name of on Petrov. Voronand, his capture, had freed Willoughby Smith. Yet the lens fragment, that delicate shard of glass, lingered in Holmes's pocket, a reminder that even in victory, some truths remained just beyond our grasp. Chapter 10. The resolution. The morning sun cast a golden haze over Yoxley, softening the grim outline of the old manor as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to depart for London. The capture of Ivan Petrov, the Black Raven's agent, had unraveled. The dark thread of conspiracy that had claimed Stanley Hopkins's life, yet a quiet tension lingered in the air, as if Yoxley Old Place were reluctant to release its secrets entirely. I, Dr. John Watson, stood in the parlour of the Red Lion, packing my bag, while Holmes sat by the window, his sharp eyes scanning a telegram that had arrived from Scotland Yard. The lens fragment, the cufflink, and the creosote-treated cloth rested on the table, their mute testimony no longer needed, yet still holding a faint aura of mystery. Holmes folded the telegram, his expression one of guarded satisfaction. "Lestrade confirms it, Watson," he said, his voice low but clear. "Petrov has been transferred to London, and his notebook filled with names and coded instructions has been handed to the Foreign Office. Willoughby Smith is to be released this afternoon, his innocence proven beyond doubt. The groundskeeper knife was indeed a plant, as I suspected, placed by Petrov to divert suspicion." I nodded, relieved but still troubled by the complexities of the case. "And Professor Coram, his role in this web of espionage, will he face justice?" Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Justice, Watson, is a slippery thing where diplomacy is concerned. Coram has agreed to cooperate with the authorities, providing details of his Russian contacts in exchange for leniency. His days as a conduit for the Black Raven are over, but I suspect he will retire to obscurity rather than face a court. His enemies in St. Petersburg will not forgive his betrayal, but that is a matter beyond our purview." We made our way to Yoxley Old Place for a final visit, the lane bright with the chatter of birds and the scent of dew-laden grass. The manor seemed less forbidding in the daylight, its ivy-clad walls softened by the sun, though the memory of its shadows lingered. Mrs. Marker greeted us with her usual sternness, but there was a new deference in her manner, as if she sensed the storm had passed. "The professor is in his study," she said, leading us through the hall, where the singed rose petal had long since been swept away. Professor Coram sat in his wheelchair, his frail form dwarfed by the towering shelves of his library. The map of the Black Sea coast had been removed from the wall, and the air was free of the acrid temps of Russian tobacco, as if he had purged the room of his past. His eyes, still sharp but now weary, met Holmes's with a mixture of resignation and gratitude. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice thin but steady, "you have brought both ruin and salvation to this house. I am in your debt, though it pains me to admit it." Holmes inclined his head, his expression neutral. "You brought ruin upon yourself, Professor. Had you been forthright, Hopkins might still live. But your cooperation has spared others, and for that you have my respect, if not my approval." Coram's hands trembled on the arms of his chair. "I never wished for blood," he said softly. "Hopkins was a fool, meddling in matters he could not understand. I warned him, but he would not listen. And now I am alone, with only my books for company." Holmes's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Books are safer companions than spies, Professor. See that you keep it so." We sought out Miss Eleanor Grayson next, finding her in the schoolroom, where she was packing her belongings into a small trunk. Her golden pince-nez, now fully repaired, hung from their chain about her neck, their lenses catching the light as she turned to face us. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a quiet strength, as if the weight of her fear had lifted with Petrov's capture. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice steady. "I heard of the arrest. Is it true? Is Willoughby Smith free?" Holmes nodded, his eyes studying her closely. "He is, Miss Grayson, thanks in no small part to your testimony, belated though it was. Petrov has confessed to the murder, and your account of the argument in the study corroborated his motive. You are free of suspicion, but I must ask why did you not speak of the letter sooner?" She lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the chain of her pince-nez. "I was terrified, Mr. Holmes. I am a governess, with no family or fortune to protect me. To be entangled in such a scandal, to know of spies and secrets, I feared it would destroy me. But I could not let an innocent man suffer. I am sorry." For my silence, Holmes's expression was unreadable, but his voice was gentle. "Fear is a powerful chain, Miss Grayson. You have broken it, and that is enough. Return to London and live without looking over your shoulder." She smiled faintly, a tear glistening in her eye. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I shall never forget what you have done." As we left the manor, the weight of the case seemed to lift, the air lighter with the resolution of its mysteries. The lens fragment, once a riddle, was now a simple relic of Miss Grayson's moment of panic, its significance dwarfed by the larger truth of Petrov's guilt. The cufflink and creosote cloth, markers of the Black Raven's presence, were in Lestrade's hands, destined for the archives of Scotland Yard. Yet Holmes's mood was not one of triumph, but of quiet reflection, as if the case had left a shadow. On his mind we caught the midday train to London, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold. Holmes sat in silence, his pipe unlit, his eyes fixed on the horizon. At length he spoke, his voice soft but clear. This was a case of shadows, Watson, shadows of empire, of betrayal, of fear. Petrov was but a pawn, Coram a reluctant player, and Miss Grayson an unwilling witness. Yet it was the smallest clue, a broken lens, that led us through the darkness. I smiled, accustomed to his penchant for philosophizing at a case's end. "And now, Holmes, back to Baker Street and the next adventure." He chuckled, a rare sound that warmed the chill of the carriage. "Indeed, Watson. But first, a pipe, and a fire, and perhaps a tune on the violin. The world will not lack for mysteries, and we shall be ready." As the train carried us toward the smoke and bustle of London, I felt a quiet pride in our work. The man in the shadows had been brought to light, Willoughby Smith was free, and Yoxley Old Place could begin to heal. Yet the memory of Miss Grayson, golden pince-nez glinting in the firelight of Baker Street, lingered in my mind, a reminder that even the smallest spark could illuminate the darkest corners of human intrigue. Chapter 11. Epilogued. Familiar glow of Baker Street greeted us as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to our lodgings, the gas lamps casting their warm light through the fog that had settled over London like a shroud. It was late afternoon, and the city hummed with its usual restless energy, but within the walls of 2-1B. A quiet satisfaction prevailed, tempered by the weight of the case we had just concluded. I, Dr. John Watson, settled into my armchair by the fire, my notebook open too. Record the final notes of what I have come to call the adventure of the golden pince-nez. Holmes, his lean frame draped in his dressing gown, stood by the window, his violin tucked under his chin, drawing forth a slow, melancholic air that seemed to echo the complexities of our recent journey to Yoxley. The case had been one of singular intricacy, weaving together the threads of a brutal murder, a governess's fear, and a web of Russian espionage that stretched from the quiet Kentish countryside to the shadowed corridors of foreign power. Ivan Petrov, the agent known as Voron, was now in the hands of Scotland Yard, his confession securing the release of Willoughby Smith. The innocent groundskeeper, wrongly accused, Professor Correa's role as a conduit for the Black Raven exposed, had traded his silence for leniency, his scholarly retreat forever altered by the intrusion of his past. And Miss Eleanor Grayson, her golden pince-nez, both a clue and a symbol of her unwitting entanglement, had returned to London, her future. Uncertain, but her conscience cleared, Holmes set down his violin, his sharp eyes turning to me with a glimmer of amusement. "You are scribbling again, Watson," he said, crossing to his armchair and lighting his pipe. "I trust you will make this tale suitably dramatic for your readers, though I fear the truth is stranger than any fiction you might conjure." Smiled, accustomed to his teasing. "It is a remarkable case, Holmes," I replied, my pen pausing. "The lens fragment, the cufflink, the Russian dispatches, each piece fits so precisely, yet it began with such an ordinary object. How did you know the Pince-Nez would lead us to the truth?" Holmes exhaled a cloud of smoke, his gaze drifting to the fire. "The world, Watson, is full of ordinary things that conceal extraordinary secrets. The lens was a trifle, yet its presence in the study was an anomaly, a delicate shard that did not belong in a scene of violence. It pointed to Miss Grayson, whose fear and silence were as telling as Petrov's knife. From there, the path was clear. The professor's Russian connections, Anna's clandestine deliveries, the cufflink's symbol all converged on Voron, a shadow made flesh. I nodded, recalling the tension of our vigil at the old mill, the glint of Petrov's blade in the moonlight. "And yet, Holmes, you seemed troubled, even after his capture. Is there more to this case?" Holmes's expression grew pensive, his fingers steepling before his lips. "There is always more, Watson, in cases such as these. The Black Raven is not one man, but a network, and Petrov's arrest will not dismantle it. Corum's cooperation may yield names, but the men he betrayed will not rest. And Miss Grayson, though safe for now, will carry the shadow of that night in her heart. The lens is mended, but the cracks remain." He rose, pacing the room with that restless energy that marked the close of a case. "This adventure began with a governess's plea and ended in the exposure of a hidden world. It reminds us, Watson, that beneath the surface of every quiet life lies a potential for intrigue, for secrets that can kill. The golden Pince-Nez was but a spark, yet it illuminated a darkness I had not anticipated." I closed my notebook, the weight of his words settling upon me. "You speak as if you regret solving it, Holmes." He paused, a rare smile softening his features. "Regret, no, Watson. But there is a melancholy in unraveling a mystery, for it strips away the veil and leaves only the truth stark, unadorned, and often cruel. Yet it is our work, and I would not trade it for the world." He took up his violin again, drawing forth a brighter melody, as if to banish the gloom of his thoughts. I leaned back, the fire's warmth easing the chill of memory, and reflected on the journey that had begun with Miss Grayson's trembling voice and her gleaming spectacles. The adventure of the golden Pince-Nez had tested Holmes's genius. revealing not only his unparalleled deductive powers, but also his ability to navigate the murky waters of human motives and international secrets. It was a tale I would recount with care, for it spoke not only of crime, but of the fragile threads that bind us to truth. As the violin's notes filled the room, Mrs. Hudson entered with a tray of tea, her presence a reminder of the ordinary life that awaited us between cases. Holmes set down his bow, accepting a cup with a nod, and for a moment we were simply two men by a fire, the world's mysteries held at bay. But I knew, as surely as the fog would return to London's streets, that another call to adventure would soon find us, and Sherlock Holmes would be ready, his mind as sharp as the lens that had led us through the shadows of Yoxley Old Place. The end.